Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another Lockdown LitFest event, where I am delighted to bring you. In fact, before I start, let me say this. I hope you're well. We all at Lockdown LitFest, we're a small team, we're burning the midnight oil, and we're working incredibly hard with some amazing support from authors, from agents, from you, our benighted and delightful audience, and from the publishing industry, to bring you week by week, for not just for the lockdown, despite our name, but forevermore, we hope, some entertaining and engaging content that acts as a diversion for lockdown, but hopefully you find informative, amusing, and entertaining. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest today, who is author and biographer Paula Byrne. She holds a PhD in English literature from the University of Liverpool and has written on Jane Austen, Evelyn Waugh, Mary Robinson, and Dido Bell. She attracted a whole new audience in 2016, though, with the international bestseller Kick, the true story of JFK's forgotten sister. And she has a marvellous new novel out, which is entitled Mirror, Mirror, which we'll discuss as well. Would you please give a very big welcome, hurrah, to Paula Byrne. Paula, how are you?
I'm living now in America, in Arizona, and it's beautiful, and the wide open skies are just gorgeous and inspiring. And I'm doing really well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted to hear. I should point out your husband, Jonathan Bate, was former provost of Worcester College at Oxford. Is it quite a paradigm shift to leave the beautiful quad of Worcester College and find yourself in the wild expanses of Arizona?
It really is. I mean, it couldn't be more different. I mean, we've always wanted to live in America. And when Jonathan was offered this incredible job, we just couldn't say no. We've been in Oxford for sort of getting on for 10 years, and we just felt it was time for a change. And we don't do things by halves, Paul, as you know. So we just thought, let's really shake it up and do something really different. The kids were all up for it. And I'm so pleased about the move. It's just, it's really fantastic. And I think it's good for your writing. I think not being in a rut and new ideas, being in a new culture, and I think for me it's been quite, it's inspired lots of ideas for writing and for books already in the short time that we've been here.
I mean, we are in the middle of lockdown while you and I are speaking today. Can you give us some insights into the difference of British lockdown experience to an American lockdown experience? What's the feeling on the streets there?
It's kind of more relaxed here in Arizona. I think it's because we don't have very many cases. There's very little public transport, so people just tend to drive out in their cars, but people are very spaced out. So it definitely feels, it feels quite relaxed. But I know other states, are struggling and having a much harder time where there is a denser population. But from our point of view, we're really actually, enjoying lockdown. I mean, we're writers. Our life probably isn't that much different. I don't feel my life is much different because I write from home. In fact, I'm loving having the kids home, Jonathan home, and we're lucky to live in a place with a garden. And I know not everybody has that, and I appreciate it. One of my books was about small things. Yes. Jane Austen, Life is Small Things, and I've always been a proponent of the small things in life that are the big things. They're the things that really matter. And I think one of the benefits of lockdown is that we've all learned to focus, I think, on small things, on looking at a beautiful flower or taking the time to slow down, which I think there have been some benefits in this, which is so peculiar, the peculiar times that we're having. But I think it's forcing us, or in a good way, to focus rather on the importance of small things.
How funny to hear you say that. I found myself very early this morning, 5 o'clock, listening to the dawn chorus outside in the garden in my pajamas, staring at a single forget-me-not flower with a magnifying glass and thinking to see the world in a grain of sand. How very funny to hear you say that.
Brilliant. Yeah, exactly. William Blake. And I've heard so many people on social media and when we do Zoom chats echo the same thing and say what they're really learning to look at nature in a different way, or learning to stop take a moment and to be still. So I get that completely.
Let's come to some of your writing, because you've done so much. As I said, you've written about Jane Austen, the theatre, you've written about Evelyn Wauld's Secret of Brideshead, Perdita, The Life of Mary Robinson, Belle, The True Story of Dido Bell, which I was a huge fan of, and of course Jane Austen, Life in Small Things. The one I want to talk about for the next few minutes or so, if I may, is one, actually it's kind of pertinent, given that you're now in the heart of America, but it's a woman who is sort of a forgotten sister, a forgotten heroine, a forgotten woman of America who did so much for transatlantic relationships. Can you tell me what first brought you to the woman who became Kathleen Cavendish, if I remember correctly, Marchioness of Hartington?
Hartington. So it's an interesting story. And I mean, I think there's sort of two answers to this. One is, I sometimes think of myself as the sort of footnote queen, because I tend to find people in other people's lives at footnotes. And I've always made it, I think, one of my objects in writing to try and find women's voices that haven't been heard before and bring new life to forgotten voices. So I've done that over my writing career. And often it's serendipity with me. So what happened with Kathleen Kennedy, whose nickname was Kick, was I was writing a life of Evelyn Waugh. And in the footnote, the footnote queen, I saw this reference to Kick. And then I thought, I'll just look her up. And then over and over again in Evelyn Waugh's diary, he would talk about Kick. I thought, it's such an unusual name. Who is Kick? So I investigated who Kick was, discovered she was the sister to JFK, very, very close friend of Evelyn Waugh, and had this fascinating life that nobody knew about. For a deliberate reason, she was whitewashed out of the family history for reasons we can talk about later. So it was really serendipitous, and it's happened to me over and over again. I just think, who's that? And then go off, do a bit of scribbling around, and then you go, wow, this is a fantastic story. Why has the story not been told? So that's really how I found Kick.
Let's talk about, let's set it in context, because a lot of people think, well, hold on, JFK, what did he have to do with Britain? But of course, if memory serves, JFK's father, the patriarch of the Kennedy clan, was United States ambassador to the United Kingdom, if memory serves. And that's sort of, am I right to think that's where the Kennedy family's relationship with Britain really started? Because he was adored, he was much admired by the establishment of Britain.
That's absolutely right. So Joe Sr. was the ambassador, the American ambassador to Great Britain, the Court of St. James, and he came over in 1938, Joe Kennedy, insisting on bringing all 9 children with him. And this is, the year before the war. So you can imagine these Kennedy children with their gleaming teeth and gorgeous skin. The British press went bonkers. It was just a dream to have Joe Kennedy, his pretty wife, tiny little Rose Kennedy, but more importantly, the photogenic 9 children who came with him and lived in the ambassador's residence and were catapulted into British high society. Now JFK's studying with Harold Lasky at the LSE. He is not on the road to presidency. That is the path for the eldest son, who's also called Joe. And Kennedy, JFK, wants to be an academic. He is very ill in England. He's quite poorly. They don't know what's wrong with him. And he read a lot. He's the academic. He's the intellectual. He's not the playboy as yet. And so in particular, the 3 eldest children, so Joe Jr., Kathleen, Kick, and Jack, were known as the Golden Trio. Yeah. They were very close to each other. They were gorgeous looking, and British high-class society fell in love with them. But I argue that the person that made that happen was Kick, and the influence that she had in high society. And it was through her that the Kennedy boys were given access to these great country houses that I think informed JFK's later policies and ways of conducting his presidency. So she's important for all sorts of reasons, but initially she was the one, she was only 18 when she came to England, she was the one that opened the doors for the other Kennedys.
If memory serves, she was something of a maverick. Can we do a little bit about her character, what she was like as a young woman? I seem to remember, it's a while since I've read Kick, forgive me, but she seemed to be a bit of a maverick. And is the name not related to walking around barefoot or something?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of reasons why we think she was called Kick. I mean, KK, Kathleen Kennedy.
Oh, of course, yes.
She one of her siblings couldn't pronounce Kathleen, so it might have been one of her siblings called her Kick, but later her family said it couldn't have been a more appropriate nickname because she was like a high-spirited pony that would kick. But she also had this habit of kicking off her shoes wherever she went. And she loved walking barefoot. And this really shocked, when she was taken up by aristocratic country house living, if you like, she would shock people because she'd come into this incredible stately home and the first thing she'd do is kick her shoes off. And people would just be really shocked. And it was just really emblematic, really, of her free-spiritedness and her lack of stuffiness. And it was that lack of stuffiness that my dog's just run in, sorry.
That's fine.
Can I get the dog, please?
It's
Not
fine.
Cool.
We're fine with dogs, Paula, don't you worry.
Can you get... I'm doing an interview, sorry, Trella, can you get around? It was that, I said it was symbolic of that lack of stuffiness.
Just wait, your daughter's in the background. Let's just wait for your daughter to leave.
I'll give you, oh no,
we don't want to plaster your daughter all over the internet.
No, don't worry, get out.
Your dog's adoring it.
It's happening all over every literary festival, a lockdown festival, and Zoom chat is the pet. So I'll take that again. So okay. One of the reasons that she was called Kick was the habit of kicking off her shoes in country houses, which people found rather shocking, but also emblematic of a sort of free-spirited lack of stuffiness. And this is the great thing about Kick. You know, Britain at that time was very stratified. You know, you stayed in your box, you stayed in your social class. And she just broke through all that stuffiness. You know, she was American, she kicked off her shoes, she could take a joke, she was brought up around boys, she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But I love her nickname because Kick, it really does sum up this sort of, this wonderful sort of feisty girl who just didn't really give a stuff about the English aristocracy. So her marrying into it is a great sort of irony. But that's why she was, we don't really know. And it's one of those nicknames that people sort of said, why did we call her Kick? But it suited her on so many different levels.
You mentioned her marriage and marriage into aristocracy. Can you introduce us to William Cavendish, Billy? Because it's what the book is largely is an enormous love story.
Yeah, Paul, you're absolutely right. And so what happened with Kick, as I said, she was... she infiltrated, that sounds the wrong word, but she was taken up by English aristocratic society. And she was not a great beauty. She was quite short. Her brothers teased her for having thick ankles. They were not aristocratic, slender ankles like Marlena Dietrich's, and a short neck, and she wasn't beautiful. Honestly, every man fell in love with her. She just had this incredible joie de vivre, a marvellous personality, was very witty, very feisty and funny. And it was a great irony that the man who fell in love with her was William Cavendish, Billy to his friends, Duke of Devonshire's eldest son, the most eligible bachelor in Britain. Billy was shy, he was 6'4", he was tall, He was very languid. The famous story goes that he was sitting having tea with his mother, and she said, "Darling, have a cup of tea." He said, "Oh, I just can't be bothered to drink it." And he was very sort of languid, but really he was very shy. And when his brother Andrew fell in love with Kik, everyone fell in love with Kik. When Billy finally met Kik, a bit later on into her time in England, he fell in love at first sight. He said it was a Romeo and Juliet thing. There was no other woman for him. It was Kik or nobody. And they just seemed such an unlikely couple. Even just physically, she's so small and petite and him so tall and lanky, but also because he was so shy and she was so ebullient. And they seemed a really unlikely couple. But they fell deeply, passionately in love, much to the horror of both sets of parents, because Billy was Anglican, Protestant, Kik was a devout Catholic, and not only were Billy's family devout Anglicans, they were anti-Catholic. So it really was a Romeo and Juliet story, and both sets of parents were really horrified. And they just hoped it would fizzle out. The war was coming. Kik was going to go back to America, and they all hoped and prayed it was just nothing more than a flirtation. But Billy was just convinced that she was the only woman for him, and at all costs, they were going to get married.
Billy served in the Second World War, if memory serves. Is that correct?
He did, and the war really was the making of him. I described him as being sort of languid and sort of lazy and posh, and in fact, the war brought out everything that was good about Billy. He was courageous. He was much admired by his men. He signed up for the war the minute war was declared. He was incredibly brilliant soldier. There's a marvellous story about how, because he was a senior in the army, he didn't have to wear regulation clothes. This is one of the things I discovered. I had no idea when I was writing this book, that often officers would wear white clothes. And it was partly to say to the Germans, screw you, I'm not scared. It was a morale boost to the men. And it was also to show that you were the captain. And Billy would wear white, and that made him a target, and it was quite deliberate. And often captains were brought down because they wore pale clothing, they didn't wear helmets. And so it really brought out the best in him. The Kennedys were hoping that this would mean the end of the relationship, but it didn't. Kik and Billy continued to write to one another during the war. She was sent back to America. She did everything she could to get back. She eventually joined the Red Cross, the American Red Cross. She came back to London in 43, and the first thing she did was to see Billy, and they resumed their relationship and got married.
We'll set up more questions that we're probably going to answer. And I do want to talk about Mirror Mirror. So can we just come to the end of Kik and explain by what means and how she managed to win the family over? Because as you and I both know Chatsworth very well, grace of the much missed Debo Devonshire, of course, former Dowager Duchess, former Duchess of Devonshire, that Kik is actually buried on the Chatsworth estate, which I always find so incredibly poignant.
Well, Debo and Kik were exactly the same age. They were born in the same year, and they became very good friends when Kik came to England. And of course, at that point, everyone thought that Kik would be the Duchess of Devonshire.
Yeah.
It was only that Billy was killed in the war, and that then meant that Andrew became the heir and that Debo became the Duchess of Devonshire. But they were great friends, and the family, like everybody else, fell in love with Kik. And they loved her, and after Billy's death, she was still a daughter. And the Devonshires have a saying, Kennedys are always family. Yeah. They met Jack Kennedy after Kik's death. They met him properly. He sent a beautiful letter which really impressed the Devonshires, and they invited him to Chatsworth. She was buried at Chatsworth, so there was, the Kennedys and the Devonshires embraced Kik. She was always one. She died young, sadly, in a plane crash, but she was family. She was their daughter. She was their beloved Billy's wife. And from that point on, the Kennedys were family. And still to this day, the Duke has told me they're considered, the Kennedys are considered family. They kept their links. So really what's very poignant is the families, like Romeo and Juliet, united by their deaths.
Yes, quite.
And it's very poignant that when JFK made his first presidential visit to Ireland, he stopped off at Chatsworth in a helicopter and knelt and prayed at the grave of Kick, buried at Chatsworth.
Yeah, it's such an incredible story. And you wrote it so well, I mean, it's not surprising it became an international bestseller. Now, you're going to tell me I'm wrong here, and it's quite possible that I am, but given you said you're the footnote queen, I have a feeling there is a link between Kick and your new novel, Mirror, Mirror, which, if I understand correctly, is loosely based on Marlena Dietrich. And I think the link might be this. And I don't know whether I've heard this from you or read it from my own reading, but I seem to remember a story whereby Marlena Dietrich, the most beautiful woman in the world, had rather sadly, less than most beautiful in the world daughter. And they were in the south of France on a beach, and JFK was incredibly kind to the daughter of Marlena Dietrich. And I'm trying to struggle to find, is this how you segued from writing about Kick and the Kennedys to Marlena Dietrich?
Yeah, Paul, you're absolutely right. So what happened in the story was, in my research, I discovered that the Kennedys would holiday in Antibes during the years they were in England. Like lots of people did, went off to the south of France. And for 2 years, Marlena Dietrich also happened to be in Europe holidaying in the south of France. Dietrich instantly had an affair with not just Joe Sr., but Joe Jr., and would disappear off to their cabana, for a siesta royale, shall we say. And the story that most fascinated me in this tale was the daughter, who was rather overweight, pimply, not beautiful, who was incredibly shy, had no siblings, and was dominated by this beautiful mother. And it's absolutely true that she befriended, the daughter's called Maria. Maria befriended the Kennedy children. She saw them on the beach, and she said they were like gods. They were these 9 incredibly beautiful children playing touch football on the beach. And she was this person looking in and thinking, I want to be a Kennedy. I'd kill for teeth like that. She said they were like an advertisement for teeth. And they were really kind to her. They knew she was Dietrich's daughter. They knew she was incredibly lonely. But the person who was really, really kind to her was Jack. And he saw that she was unattractive and plain, and he would make a point of dances on the Riviera, of walking across the dance hall and seeing this wallflower. And Marlena would dress her in these terrible dresses that look, with a big cummerbund, like making her look like she was sort of, 8 when she was 13. And he would walk across the room and dance with her and make her feel special. And throughout her life, Jack would come back and take her for tea and take her out. And it just gave me the idea for a novel. I wanted to write a historical novel about Dietrich. And it gave me the idea for a plot that would be a book about mothers and daughters. But the thread that would run through the story would be Jack Kennedy, who the daughter very much saw as the only man who'd really paid her attention and hadn't slept with her mother, because most men did. And so it became, that's basically where I got the idea. So yes, Paul, you're right.
It's a fantastic, just so we're clear on names, because I get very confused with Kennedy names. When you say Jack, you mean John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, yes?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll call him Jack if it's okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, fine. I get so confused by this, and I know other people do as well. So, I mean, you've had some fantastic reviews for this. The character in the book is called Madhu, discovered in a Berlin cabaret in the Roaring Trenches, brought to the glamour of Los Angeles, becomes a superstar of the silver screen. There's a thread running through this. I mean, it's incredibly moving and deeply evocative, but the thread is the price of beauty. That seems to me to be what drives this book. Is that what you wanted to write about? That thin veneer of beauty. And if that's what you have, if that's your gift to the world, that comes with a price.
Absolutely. And I love 1930s Hollywood, the golden age of Hollywood. I was sort of raised on the greats, Dietrich and Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. I love that world. And I've lived in Los Angeles and I know it really well. So I felt I would be able to do the sort of evocative writing about the landscape. And, you know, I went to Paramount Studios and pored over it and just got lots of wonderful detail. But I've always been fascinated by Dietrich because of The Price of Beauty. And one of the tales about Dietrich later on was that she was a very brave soldier, Dietrich. And I didn't want to make her a monster. I didn't want this to be Mommy Dearest, you know, Marlena Dearest.
Yeah.
But she suffered terribly physically for her beauty. And in the days before facelifts, what she would do is she'd have her hairdresser weave tiny plaits into her head, into her hair, and then pull her face back, and her scalp would be bleeding. And then she'd put her wig on. And then she had terrible problems with her legs. And she had a problem with her legs would swell. And it was an arterial problem. And so underneath that beautiful shimmering sheath of a dress would be this woman in agony. Oh. And sometimes bandages would be, you know, full of blood, and then the scalp would be full of blood. And it just felt to me that the pursuit of beauty, the pursuit of perfection comes at such a great price. Yeah. A physical price, but also an emotional, psychological price. And this manifested itself. I mean, she became an alcoholic, Dietrich, as many stars did. But also I wanted to look at the price on her daughter. And I've always been interested in relationships between mothers and daughters. It's very complex, it's very fraught. And this one was particularly interesting to me because the daughter was not beautiful. So I had this idea in my head of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and Mirror, Mirror on the Wall. Marlena Dietrich carried around an 8-foot mirror on wheels. Yeah. She learned to light herself. She was an expert at lighting, and she would direct the grips, the cameramen. She made friends with them, and she would know, and she would use the mirror that was just off stage to light herself. So she got the cheekbones. So she'd get a little butterfly on her lip, and then that's when she knew that the cheekbones at the right angle. And I had this idea of mirror, mirror. The mirror has to tell the truth. So when she speaks to the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all, the mirror has to say you. But it can only speak the truth, like in Snow White. And I did a lot of research into the original Grimm's brothers because they were obviously German, and I was very interested in Marlena's German heritage. In the original Grimm's brothers tale, it's not a wicked stepmother, it's a mother who's jealous of her child's beauty. Exactly. And the Grimm's brothers, when it was translated into English, they felt the English translators thought it was too harsh. Yeah. So they changed it to a stepmother. How could a mother hate her own daughter? How can a mother be jealous of her daughter's beauty? What happened with Marlena and Kata, she called her daughter Kata, she was called Maria, was she did become beautiful. Yes. And as Marlena aged, Kata became thin and beautiful, and Marlena found it increasingly difficult to cope with the loss of her beauty, with age. Age is going to get you in the end. Mm-hmm. So I had this idea that the mirror, the novel would be split into two narratives. It would be the daughter looking back as an old woman on her life, this extraordinary life as the daughter of Dietrich. But the other voice would be a mirror, and it would be the mirror telling the present, the story in the present. And the mirror is Marlena's best friend. So the mirror I actually had the idea that he always felt to me like Noel Coward, the mirror. It was a man. I don't know why. I mean, having an inanimate object as a character is a challenge. Also. And I'm so pleased that one of my reviewers says, this should not work, but it does. She pulls it off. She pulls it off. I'm like, praise the Lord. So, because Noel Coward was Marlena's best friend, and he was a truth teller. So every chapter title in the Mirror Voice is a Noel Coward song. But also, I read countless biographies, I read his letters, tried to capture the voice of Noel Coward. It's quite malicious, it's witty, it's camp. I used some of his actual sayings, but the mirror has to tell the truth. He's got to tell Madhu whether she is more beautiful. And initially, the daughter hates the mirror because she's ugly, so she's hiding from it every time she sees it. And the mirror can't stand her. He thinks she's fat and she's piggy wig. And she just hides from the mirror. She hides from it. So she throws scarves over it. She won't look at it. She's always in, and Madhu's always in it. And so the mirror becomes a character in the book. But so it's a two-sided story. So I wanted to get the daughter's voice, but also the voice of the mirror. Does that make any sense to you, Paul?
It's beautifully described, Paula, and thank you for it. You know what I'm going to ask you now, don't you, given that you're talking about the voice of the mirror? Do you have an extract you'd be prepared to read to the Lockdown LitFest audience as an exclusive?
I would love to read an extract. So I'll show you. I'm going to show you the cover because I think it's great.
You have to hold it directly in front of. Here we go. Just sort of just hold it where your shirt is, slightly to the right. There we go. That's got it. Thank you very much.
I love the cover because it shows a broken mirror and there's little sort of fragments of a Dietrich in it. So I'm going to start with a chapter called "The Devil is a Woman." So just to recap, all of the chapters written from the daughter's point of view are the titles of a Dietrich film.
Yeah.
And all the titles of the mirror's voice are the titles of a Noel Coward song. So this chapter is called "The Devil is a Woman." And this is one of Dietrich's most famous films, directed by her lover, Joseph von Sternberg. And she really is at her most beautiful. And she often plays the role, Dietrich, of the beautiful but crude woman who brings down a great man. So this chapter is called "The Devil is a Woman." And this is the voice of Marlena Dietrich's daughter. It's funny how I can remember every single person who's ever been kind to me. When I look back now, I see so much, but I guess that's the way it is for most people. I never knew my age in those days when we first went to Hollywood. That was because my mother constantly changed it, so I never had a chance to celebrate my birthday. To her friends and fans, I was a baby. To others, I was a young girl of 9 or maybe 8. All I knew was that I had the most beautiful mother in the world and that I was ugly. My face was covered with pimples. Mother blamed the cream pastries I ate. It was one of the things I most loved about America, the food. For breakfast, the maid would bring me a stack of pancakes with maple syrup and whipped butter. There were strips of salty bacon on the side. American waffles with cream and blueberries. Glorioski. Mother glared at me, sipping water mixed with Epsom salts. This was how she stayed pencil thin. "Sweetheart, hurry, the car is here. That big girl's blouse will be weeping into his coffee if I move even 5 minutes late." Her co-star was English, Peter somebody. On the whole, she disliked Englishmen. Thick white ankles, fingers like uncut sausages. She was obsessed by the beauty of her own slender ankles. Aristocrats have thin ankles. Only peasants have thick ones. She looked at my fat ankles accusingly as she said this. I felt sorry for my mother because she'd given birth to such a plain child. I looked exactly like my father, but what was handsome in a man was plain in a female. In the mirrored dining table where we were eating a hurried breakfast, I could see my reflection. High forehead, large flat nose, deep-set eyes. My bushy eyebrows made me look perpetually cross. My hair was fine in a pale shade of ginger. I had blotchy brown freckles I tried to scrub off with lemon juice. It never worked. But I had a lovely mouth with a cupid's bow. It was the only feature that I inherited from my mother. I decided then that it might be best to avoid mirrors.
Beautifully read. Thank you so much, Paula. One quick question. We're running shy on time, but I want to ask you quickly. Given that you've really carved your name out as a biographer, why fiction? Why not a biography?
Well, I've just finished another biography, which is a new life of the English novelist Barbara Pym. And I really just wanted to give it a go. Over the years, and I think, Paul, you've probably asked me this question in many festivals where you've interviewed me, have you ever thought of writing a novel? People have often asked me, have you ever thought of writing a novel? You write your biographies with sort of a novelistic approach. You describe settings, you describe clothes. And I always said, no, I'm far too terrified.
Well, you wrote a couple of years ago called Look to Your Wife, did you not?
just last year.
Was that last year?
Okay. It was just last year. And then I thought, well, look, why not give it a go? Why? Look, it's cowardly not to have a go. So the first novel, which came out about a year and a half ago, it was all written in my head. And I wrote it very, very quickly. I wrote it in 3 weeks. And I just sent it off to my agent, to my publisher, and said, look, I've just written this novel. It could be completely awful, but have a look at it. And she loved it. And she said, I really want to publish it. And she said, although I'm your publisher for non-fiction, I'm going to publish it. Arabella Pike, marvellous woman. And she actually brought in a literary editor just for me. And she said, carry on. I mean, I think she's one in a million because publishers like to box people. And Arabella's not like that. She said, we want you. We think this is a fantastic novel. We want you to have the space to have a go at writing fiction. And that novel did well. It got very good reviews. And then I had a 2-book deal because I had the Dietrich novel in my head because of Kick. And so I Look to Your Wife, which is a contemporary novel, a satire. But I really felt my métier was historical fiction. Okay. And so I had the Dietrich book also in my head. And I just wanted to give it a go. And I have to say, I just completely loved writing it. I found it easy to write, not easy to write, but it flowed. It was marvellous not having to think about footnotes all the time. It was so liberating. But I haven't given up on biography. I've got a new biography, Barbara Pink, coming up. But I want to just want to keep doing both. I'm so lucky to have a fantastic editor that allows me the freedom.
Well, but I'm sorry to cut you short, but we're running short of time. And there's one thing I really want to talk to you about. I'm so sorry to do this, because I don't want to go without you having a minute to talk about Relit.
Of course. So I'll be quick as I can. Jonathan and I, we founded a charity devoted to the mental health effects of reading, especially but not specifically poetry, because poetry is bite-sized and easily manageable. So we read in prisons and in hospices and in hospitals. And really, we're just trying to bring that love of reading, of literature, as a way of being a tool in the kit of mental health. So relit, can you be relit by literature, by the power of words? And it's still in its infancy. It's been going for sort of 3 or 4 years, but we love it, and it's our giving back, and hoping to inspire other people who love literature and who can help to manage their own mental health by reading.
Here and amen to that. Is there a website you want to point people to?
It's relit.org.uk.
And there's a rather lovely book called Stressed Unstressed, Classic Poems to Ease the Mind. And given that people are struggling with lockdown, it may be appropriate to flag it up. That's edited by Jonathan Bate, published by William Collins, and I'm sure they can find it on the relit.co.uk website. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that's right, Paul. Thank you so much.
Well, I didn't want to miss the chance to do that, because it seems in these troubled times, it's a wonderful thing to be able to give some...
thank you. I really appreciate that.
Paula, can I thank you, before I thank the audience, can I thank you very much for coming to join us. Thank you for giving so freely good time. Thank you so much for reading for us. And really good luck with Mirror. It's a hell of a cover, it's a hell of a novel, and it's a hell of a story. Thank you so much for joining us, Paula. Look after yourself. Good luck to you and Jonathan, lockdown in Arizona. And to you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Cheerio.
Thanks, Paul.